Matthias Cormann, welcome to ABC News 24.
Good to be here.
If I could ask you a question on super that the government has been asking, is it a policy commitment from the opposition to bring back the tax on superannuation for the lowest paid, the ones the government has scrapped?
We've long been on the record as saying that any promise which is unfunded, which the current government has attached to the mining tax, we will not proceed with. We've made one exception to that.
Yes, you do have one exception.
We've made one exception to that, and that was that we've said that we would not rescind the increase in compulsory super from 9 to 12%, but we will not make any other exceptions.
So that tax that the government's abolished will come back on if the coalition government if the coalition wins government.
We will have our own policies to provide incentives in a targeted and fiscally sustainable way, so that Australians across all income brackets, from low-income earners to middle class to higher income earners, have got appropriate incentives to encourage them to save more towards their retirement.
So you could possibly replace that axing of the tax with something of your own?
Let's be very clear. I mean, the Labor Party is running a class war against the rich before the election. If Labor was re-elected in September, they would do what they've done every time before. They would increase taxes on superannuation for low-income earners and for the middle class.
The Minister says that lower income earners tax break is funded out of the mining tax and consolidated revenue.
The mining tax is not raising any revenue.
He did say and consolidated revenue. He says it is budgeted.
It's not. That's the whole point. I mean, I could show you the list. When the Labor Party announced their mining tax, they said these are the things that will be funded out of it, and this is one of the measures. Now, the mining tax has not raised any meaningful revenue. I mean, the mining tax has been shrinking for some time, and the revenue, they're so embarrassed by that that they're keeping the information about it secret. So what we're saying is that we will be putting forward our policy openly and transparently about how we propose to encourage and incentivize people across all income brackets to save for their retirement.
So it's possible that tax might not go back on?
Well, what we've said is we're not going to proceed. We're not going to proceed with the measures that the Labor Party has attached to the mining tax. We've said that for a long time, openly and transparently, but we will be announcing our own policies on how to encourage people across all income brackets to save for their retirement. Now, you've got to remember, nobody can trust anything the Labor Party says on this, because in 2007 they said they would not make any change, and then this government has cut $1,000 out of the low-income earners' super co-contribution. They took the super co-contribution from the government from $1,500 under the Howard government all the way down to $500, even though they said it would never happen.
The measure the government put in place to axe the tax for low-income earners' superannuation costs, I think, about $1 billion a year.
And it's not funded. They can't afford it.
But is what you're going to do likely to be in the same order?
Well, what I'm saying is this. Whatever Labor is saying before the election, after the election they would scrap that particular offset because they cannot afford it. There is no money there from the mining tax to pay for it. What we've said is that we are focused...
But the Minister, as I said before, the Minister told News 24 earlier today that it's funded out of the mining tax and consolidated revenue.
Well, I mean, you can't trust anything the Labor Party says on this. They'll deny it. In 2007, they said we're not going to make any changes to superannuation, and then they cut the low-income earners' super co-contribution by $1,000. They also cut the concessional contribution caps from $50,000 and $100,000 down to $25,000. In 2010, the Treasurer, Wayne Swan, made an emphatic, a solemn promise that this government would never, ever remove the tax-free status of super payments to the over 60s. And that is exactly what they're now looking at. Yet again, targeting and penalising the aspirational middle class.
The latest tax expenditure statement released by the government shows that superannuation tax concessions are the biggest tax expenditure now, exceeding the cost of concessions for owner-occupied housing. Can the budget keep sustaining this call on revenue?
Well, let's be very clear. It's not expenditure. It's Labor Party language to call this expenditure. I mean, somehow to say, well, the tax at present is 15%, but if we had some imaginary other tax rate, then the revenue would be X, Y, Z, and somehow the gap between the lower tax rate and an imaginary higher tax rate is expenditure. That's just ridiculous.
You would not be looking at all at superannuation to find any budget savings you need?
We think that people, Australians saving for their retirement. Australians doing the right thing by making sure that they can look after their own retirement needs, to not being a burden on the public purse, that they deserve to be able to plan their future with certainty, with stability, and that they can have confidence that there won't be this constant chopping and changing and this constant additional Labor Party taxes.
So no touching of the superannuation tax concessions in at least the first term of the coalition government.
We will not make any adverse, detrimental, unexpected changes in the first term of a coalition government, and of course anything that would happen in a possible second term will be the subject of discussions in the lead up to that election.
If I could ask you finally, the Senate's expected to pass a resolution, a motion today calling on the government to release the figures about how much money the mining tax is raising. Does that compel the government to do so? Well,
the Senate is about to order the Tax Commission not to provide the information to the Senate Economics References Committee about how much or how little the mining tax has actually raised so far.
So there's no way the government, the tax commissioner, can say no to that?
Well, I mean, essentially in the Tax Act, it actually specifically says that nothing in the confidentiality provisions prevents tax officers from providing protected information to a committee of the Parliament. I mean, it's a ridiculous proposition. The government wants us to accept that they can come up with a new tax, make predictions on how much it's going to raise, spend all the money they say they think it will raise, and now that it's been in place for a while, somehow we are supposed to accept that none of us are entitled to know whether it has or whether it hasn't raised the revenue they predicted. It is a ridiculous and completely unacceptable proposition.
Matthias Cormann, thank you very much for your time.
Always good to be here.